The 140 debate. This is an interesting topic that I discuss with a lot of my subscribers or customers, but the question basically boils down to this. Was the 140 the first technologically over-engineered Mercedes that relied too much on electronics, or was it the last of the really remarkable, fully thought out, mechanically perfected Mercedes designs? And I think the easiest way to phrase this in a less complicated format would be, is the 140 a technological disaster, or is it a handcrafted, beautiful masterpiece? Now, I think that most of you know where I stand, but I'm going to try to answer this question as objectively as possible, because most of the people who like 140s on this channel have actually had to, figure out their own problems and solve their own problems, whereas I think that the typical 140 owner just doesn't really care about the car. But my friend Jamie and I at Classic Workshop, if you haven't checked out his business, Classic Workshop is in Hackettstown, New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Jamie and I were noticing recently that the prices of nice 140s have started to climb. And to me, this indicates that the 140 actually does have a following, although I think that the reasons people like 140s are different from the reasons people like 126s or 116s. So let's look at some of those reasons. I like my 116 because the car is laid out in a way where generally everything is serviceable. Nothing just like crumbles or falls apart. It's a pretty solid car overall. If you look at the rear overhead panel where the light that illuminates the back seats goes, it's made of aluminum, and then it has foam, and then it has vinyl vacuum sealed onto it. This panel is an unbreakable piece of material. It's just almost too good to describe. It's impressive how well made it is. Meanwhile, on the 126, the panel is still removable and accessible, but it's kind of a flimsy cardboard panel that can go bad if you're not real careful, and repairing one it's a little bit tricky, but you actually have to reinforce the panel so it doesn't bow in the middle. And finally, on the 140, you have a headliner board. And this is just something that you have to deal with on new cars. So the headliner board is supposed to be simpler and easier to remove, like it is on a 124, but headliners come unglued and then things don't look as good. Granted, the 140 did have some high quality finishes. I just personally don't like the possibility of failure. And sometimes the actual failure and the possibility of failure scare me just as much. But the 140 has some additional problems that I think make it a difficult car to collect. First of all, there's so many complex parts in that car, Mercedes can't supply them all. It's not like handing a set of blueprints to a mom and pop factory in Germany where they have a bunch of 100-year-old elves working on milling machines and lathes and cutting machines, and they say, here, make 100 of these pins, that hold the seat back together in a 280 SE 3.5 coupe. Instead, it's more like, oh, we need to build a circuit board. We need to reverse engineer the circuit board. Oh, this gateway is only available from this supplier. How are we going to get it? You suddenly see the difficulty in ramping up for a control unit or a giant wiring harness. And believe me, the body harnesses on 140s deteriorate because they're made of the same crappy materials as the engine harnesses are on certain models. The other interesting thing about the 140 in terms of parts availability is that the cars changed so much during their production runs that things just get more and more interesting. So the biggest issue I see is that if you have 8 different versions of a wheel or 25, 30 different versions of an interior trim part, or 4 or 5 different versions of a control unit, depending on which car and model and market it goes to, what are you going to do when you have to make all that stuff? And the simple answer is you just can't. You know, if you're a manufacturer and you have to prioritize newer models, you just can't. I mean, we already see 124 interior parts falling by the wayside. So if you have a 500E, you're in trouble and you better take care of everything you've got. But I find it really, really frustrating when I try to locate 140 parts and I realize that all the major parts in a system that fail are just not available anymore. Now we're going to look at some other aspects of the 140, maybe from an aesthetic point of view, that it both endear people and make them shy away from. Now, if you look at the 126, everything's purposeful, everything makes sense, everything is sort of laid out in a way where there's nothing of excess left in the car. It's just the right amount of luxury, just the right amount of handling, just the right amount of shell rigidity, just the right amount of lightness and heaviness. You know, I think on the 140, everything was just so exaggerated. And some people like this, I admit. There are a lot of people who love a big, giant, cushy, comfortable car. But with the W140, this bigness comes at a big price. It's harder to service. It's harder to do suspension work. Suspension parts wear out more quickly. It's harder to take stuff apart in the interior because there's so many layers of things. You know, like you have dashboard and giant mega wiring harness and this control unit and that control unit, and oh, this carpet doesn't just lift out. You have to undo all these fastening points. Granted, I'm not as familiar with the 140, but I don't perceive working on one to be very easy just because of the bulk of the car. It's like working on a 600. Anytime we have a 600 coming in the shop, it's like we have to move everything out of the way, you know. And so I think, in my opinion, it's just too big, but some people would actually like the car. Now, we know all the debates about wiring harnesses failing, evaporators failing. If you don't know about these, Google them. We know about things like distributor cap issues on M119 engines. We know about head gaskets on M104 engines. But if Mercedes doesn't solve the parts availability issue for these cars, then collecting them and maintaining them is going to be very hard, and there aren't going to be a lot of nice ones left. So, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and share the video with somebody who likes Mercedes. You know, these are all difficult questions that don't have exact answers. But if you like 140s, I hope you're as self-reliant as possible, because all the service literature is locked up in an electronic format on StarTech Info. So you can't just go out and buy a book like you can for a 126 or a 123 or a 107. So anyway, I wish you guys the best of luck if you're collecting these cars. And if you're debating between a 126 and a 140, the 126 is the better car, unless you have to have a giant, huge, massive car that feels like a condo on wheels. So I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I'll see you in the future.